Time now for the lady behind the other lady, or Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, as we prefer to call her. Natasha, what did you make of that?
Hi, James. Yes, I thought it was a really interesting speech. Potentially could have been cut down a little bit, in my personal opinion, I think. But not that we don't welcome an alternative LBC presenter at this time of the morning. But yes, really interesting plan and quite an optimistic, I think, vision for Rachel Reeves today. A real handbrake turn from that speech that the Prime Minister gave in the Downing Street garden when they just got into power, talking about, how the Tories had driven the country into decline and how we're going to have to make some really difficult decisions to get out of that. This is the start of Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer putting the fight back into the British economy. They want to fire it up on all cylinders, go for growth, because they know that they do not have the money to spend on public services, on our NHS, on our schools, if they do not grow the economy, create more jobs and get more investment from businesses. So that was all about this speech, all what this speech was about from Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, today, talking about those sunlit uplands which are on the way, wanting to slash red tape, get more infrastructure built. She said that she was genuinely shocked at the amount of time it took for people to get anything built in this country, and we've heard a lot about that £100 million back tunnel that had to be built because of HS2 and of concerns over the environment. And essentially it sounds like the government are going to put this growth agenda over absolutely everything else in government. So we will see this going forward as the priority. And you just were talking to your last caller about what it means for people. I actually thought that Rachel Reeves' speech at the beginning was quite good at talking about how growth can't just be a line on a graph. It has to actually mean something for people. It has to mean pounds in our pockets. It has to mean people's wages growing and people feeling better off. And that will be the real test of this speech at the end of those 5 years. Because Rachel Reeves, and she talked about this when she talked about Heathrow, is acknowledging that some of these things, Rishi Sunak found this, all governments find this, these projects, these infrastructure, big decisions, HS2, Heathrow expansion, they all take time and they all take a long time to actually trickle down into people's pockets. And that will be the question for her in 5 years' time. Do people actually feel better off? And of course, one alternative sort of audience for this speech today wasn't just the British public, it was businesses. And we know that they are feeling particularly gloomy at the moment. So many of them have told us that they are going to have to cut jobs, that they're going to have to make losses, that everything is not going well. And the national insurance hike hasn't even come in yet. That's going to be coming in April. And the Chancellor in just a sort of month and a half, 2 months' time, will be giving her update to Parliament from the Office for Budget Responsibility on the state of the finances and whether she's got enough money to do all the things that she wants to do. So we'll be watching that one carefully and watching from the reaction from businesses, because at the moment, I think, since they came in, that budget, I think Rachel Reeves flew pretty close to the wind on it. I think she upset quite a lot of people with that business hike. So we're going to have to see the reaction from businesses. So far, it's been quite positive. Lots of really good ideas for growth and cutting red tape and deregulation, all these things that businesses love to hear. But let's look at a little bit further at the devil in the detail from some of these business leaders to see whether they'll welcome it or not.
Yes, let's. You just had an odd effect on me, Natasha. One of the phrases that you used sort of brought back, I don't know whether it was intentional or not. She didn't use the phrase sunlit uplands, did she?
No, she didn't.
No, but you remind us.
I wrote on my notepad as I was thinking it, and I wrote it down.
It's really helpful because I was just sort of nibbling at the notion that this represents a return to detail. Now, there's no guarantee that it will work. That there is never any guarantee that any economic policy will work, or indeed any investment will pay off. But what we're not listening to is obvious nonsense. Promises to build 40 hospitals, or promises of sunlit uplands, or promises that, the German car industry will come to our rescue in the event. So I probably managed to block it out a bit for reasons of psychological health. But years and years and years of senior politicians making promises that they themselves know to be unkeepable, now being replaced by a programme of policies that are not guaranteed to work, but are at least real and rooted in reality. We're going to lose the line again, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think we had Rachel Reeves promising the speech today. We had her, talking about all the different plans she wants to do, but she's not promising that things are, she's not promising an extra hundreds of pounds of extra money in people's pockets. She's not promising that inflation is going to go down, and interest rates are going to be slashed tomorrow. She's not promising that sort of land, but I think she's starting to sow the seeds of what the government hope is a little bit of hope. And you heard her talk about, at the very beginning of the speech, how she hopes this is the start of turning things around.
Yes.
And I do think that's a really difficult balance that many politicians have to battle with, about giving people a hope and optimism for the future, but also about being realistic about the difficulties that we face. And it does feel like a very about turn from the Chancellor, from the Prime Minister, who just a few months ago were talking about how dire things were. And obviously, if you look at the state of the public finances, they are still pretty dire. She's got a whole host of problems, and she has to obviously be the ambassador for Britain to try and persuade those investors, those businesses, to come to Britain, not to leave, despite all of the sort of reports that we're hearing about potential millionaires getting up and leaving Britain and going elsewhere, and other businesses looking to other markets instead to invest. So she's got to be that hope. She's got to be that optimism. But yeah, all the devil will be in the detail.
It will. And does this close down the...
About whether businesses actually believe that.
Sorry. Does this close down the Conservative accusation that they don't have a plan? I noticed already they've shifted to, all right, well, they do have a plan, but it's a rubbish one. But they have to now abandon the territory that accuses them of having no plan.
Yeah, I think so. This is definitely the outlines and the sketch of a really big, bold and ambitious plan from government. And like I say, they can say it might not work, but equally they can't accuse them of not having. That was Rachel Reeves' argument today of pulling the Brexit, what's there about having to do differently. And that's, I'm sure, going to be an argument that will come up at Prime Minister's questions later today when Kemi Badenoch tries to attack the government over this. Keir Starmer will be able to say, well, how are you going to do things differently? I've just laid out my plan. Let's wait and see if it can deliver. But yes, I think privately, some Conservatives that I was speaking to are quite, accepting that Rachel Reeves doesn't have a lot of other options, that they don't have a lot of other options, that they obviously can bash it and say it's not going to go far enough. But, you just opened the accusation, well, why didn't you do any of these things that you wanted to do in your 14 years in government too?
Indeed, and why didn't many of our friends and colleagues in the media point out how badly things were going for the duration of those 14 years in government, particularly, of course, since the Brexit vote in 2016, until the Labour Party was charged with fixing the mess that had been left behind. Listening to elements of Natasha's conversation there, I'm reminded that on Global Player, you can rewind and pause live radio. And if you're listening back on the podcast, you can even speed us up a bit. So you could listen to a 1 hour podcast, for example, James O'Brien Daily. Dan's got the hardest job in the building today, hasn't he? I've barely been on air, and he's got to come up with 60 minutes of highlights. We've got PMQs and 2 guests on the way as well. So I don't know how much JOB there'll be on the JOB Daily this afternoon. And of course, Natasha won't be back from Oxford, so the studio will be graced by the presence of Aggie Chambray, LBC's deputy political editor, in the LBC studio for PMQs, which is coming up in just under half an hour.